World War II was fought with an astonishing diversity of ammunition, dozens of different calibers powering rifles, pistols, machine guns, cannons, and more. Each cartridge represented years of ballistic research, national military doctrine, and the brutal lessons learned from previous conflicts. Here's a comprehensive examination of the ammunition that armed millions of soldiers across every battlefield. Let's begin with rifle and light machine gun calibers. The .30-06 Springfield, officially designated the .30 caliber M1906, stands as the legendary American rifle round that defined an era. Adopted in 1906 and serving faithfully throughout both World Wars, it fired from the iconic M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle, the devastating Browning automatic rifle, and countless belt-fed machine guns, including the M1919 Browning. Delivering a 150 to 180 grain bullet at approximately 2,700 feet per second, it was genuinely powerful, utterly ubiquitous across American forces, and defined United States infantry firepower for over 4 decades of service. The 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser, often called 8 mm Mauser, formed the absolute backbone of the German Wehrmacht throughout the entire conflict. Originally adopted in the German Empire in 1888 and refined in 1903 with the Spitzer pointed bullet, it fired from the Carabiner 98K bolt-action rifle, the brutally efficient MG-34, and the absolutely feared MG-42 machine gun. Propelling a 154 to 198 grain bullet at velocities exceeding 2,700 feet per second, this superb full-power rifle cartridge saw intensive use across every front, from the frozen Russian steppes to the scorching North African desert. The 7.92 by 33 mm Kurz represents a truly revolutionary development in military ammunition. Adopted in 1943, this intermediate cartridge powered the Sturmgewehr 44, arguably the world's first true assault rifle that would fundamentally influence all subsequent automatic rifle designs. By reducing case length and powder charge compared to the full-power 7.92 by 57 mm round, it deliberately shortened the effective range to approximately 300 meters, but dramatically increased sustained automatic fire capability and controllability. This innovation recognized that most infantry combat occurred at ranges under 400 meters, making full-power rifle cartridges unnecessarily powerful while producing excessive recoil. Next up, the .303 British, affectionately known as the Grand Old Lady of Commonwealth Forces. Officially designated the .303-inch Mark VII, this cartridge was adopted in 1889 and remained absolutely essential throughout 2 world wars. It fired from the legendary Lee Enfield rifle series and the excellent Bren light machine gun, delivering a 174 grain bullet at about 2,440 feet per second. It distinctively featured a rimmed case design inherited from earlier black powder cartridges, which occasionally complicated high-speed extraction in semi-automatic weapons, but proved entirely adequate in bolt-action rifles. The 7.62 by 54 mm R stands as the Russian standard cartridge since Tsarist times, adopted in 1891 and remaining in continuous military service longer than virtually any other military cartridge in history. The R designation indicates its distinctive rim design. This genuinely powerful round drove the Mosin-Nagant rifle through decades of service and fed the DP-27 light machine gun, propelling a 148 to 182 grain bullet at approximately 2,650 feet per second. It remained in frontline Soviet service throughout World War II and continues in specialized roles even today. Moving on, the 7.5 by 54 mm French. Developed during the interwar period and officially adopted in 1929 to replace the obsolete 8 mm Lebel round, it became the standard French rifle and machine gun cartridge. Used by both Free French and Vichy forces during the conflict in weapons like the MAS-36 rifle and MAC-24-29 light machine gun, it delivered a 139-grain bullet at about 2,700 feet per second, offering performance comparable to other contemporary military cartridges. The 7.7 by 58 mm Arisaka served as the primary full-power round of Imperial Japan during the latter half of the conflict. Officially adopted in 1939 as the Type 99, it was specifically intended to replace the smaller 6.5 mm round in service. Firing a heavier 174-grain bullet at approximately 2,400 feet per second, it offered ballistic performance genuinely comparable to the British .303, providing improved long-range performance and greater striking power. The 6.5 by 50 mm Arisaka, officially the Type 38 cartridge adopted in 1905, was a smaller Japanese round used extensively during the early conflict years and throughout China. Known particularly for its remarkably mild recoil and surprisingly good penetration given its modest bullet weight of just 139 grains, it proved a highly effective infantry cartridge, especially well suited for the close-range jungle fighting that characterized much Pacific combat. Next, the 6.5 by 52 mm Carcano, the principal Italian rifle cartridge, adopted in 1891. It was generally considered somewhat underpowered compared to its larger contemporaries, firing a 162-grain bullet at approximately 2,300 feet per second. Used primarily in the extensive family of Italian Carcano rifles, it served throughout both world wars, despite Italy's attempts to adopt more powerful ammunition. The 7.35 by 51 mm Carcano represents Italy's ambitious attempt to modernize its infantry armament by adopting this more powerful round just before the war in 1938. However, Italy's limited industrial capacity and the enormous existing stockpiles of 6.5 mm ammunition meant they completely lacked the production capability to implement this transition. They were forced to revert almost immediately back to the older 6.5 mm caliber, with only limited numbers of 7.35 mm rifles ever reaching frontline service. The 6.5 by 55 mm Swedish stands as an outstanding and highly accurate caliber adopted by Sweden in 1894. While Sweden maintained strict neutrality throughout World War II, this exceptional round was used in the superbly crafted Swedish M96 Mauser rifles, weapons renowned globally for their exceptional quality, precision, and workmanship. The cartridge fires a 139 to 156 grain bullet at about 2,650 feet per second. The 8.59 mm R Breda represents a unique, genuinely powerful Italian heavy machine gun cartridge. Adopted in 1935, it was designed specifically for long-range suppression fire and anti-aircraft work. Mostly employed in vehicle-mounted installations and dedicated anti-aircraft machine gun roles, it fired a massive 208-grain bullet, providing substantially greater range and penetration than standard rifle calibers. The 7 by 57 mm Mauser, though largely superseded by larger calibers, saw this older German design from 1892 in limited use across various theaters. It appeared particularly in older weapons supplied to Axis allies, including Spain, or issued to reserve and second-line units. Firing a 139 to 173 grain bullet at approximately 2,800 feet per second, it remained an effective cartridge despite its age. Moving on, the 7.65 by 53 mm Mauser. This widely adopted round from 1889 was used by various South American and European armies, including Belgium and Turkey, who retained older Mauser rifles chambered for this cartridge during the war years. It fired a 214-grain round-nose bullet at about 2,000 feet per second, adequate for its era, but clearly obsolete by World War II standards. The 8x50mm R Lebel, the outdated rimmed French infantry round from the First World War adopted in 1886, though officially replaced, it remained in use by secondary French units and colonial forces in 1940. Its unusual rimmed, sharply tapered case required specialized tube magazines with deep sections for reliable feeding, complicating weapon design significantly. Next up, the 8x56mm R Mannlicher, the standard infantry rifle round of Austria-Hungary before the Great War, was adopted in 1893. It remained in continuous service with Hungary and other minor Axis powers, including Bulgaria, throughout World War II. The rimmed case fired a 244-grain bullet at approximately 2,000 feet per second from rifles like the Mannlicher M1895. The 7.92 by 60mm Scharfschützenpatrone refers to the standard German rifle round loaded with specialized armor-piercing or tracer variants. The Wehrmacht produced numerous specialized loadings, including armor-piercing, tracer, and incendiary rounds for specific tactical requirements. Next on the list, pistol and submachine gun calibers. The 9x19mm Parabellum stands as the definitive submachine gun and pistol round of the entire war. Developed by Georg Luger in 1902, it was used extensively by Germans in the MP-38 and MP-40 submachine guns, the Luger P-08 and Walther P-38 pistols. Later widely adopted by Allied forces in weapons like the British Sten gun, it proved reliable and highly effective at short combat ranges, firing a 115 to 124 grain bullet at approximately 1,200 feet per second. The 7.62 by 25mm Tokarev, the high-velocity small-caliber pistol and submachine gun round of the Soviet Union. Adopted in 1930 and heavily based on the 7.63 by 25mm Mauser cartridge, it was known for its exceptional velocity of approximately 1,400 feet per second and impressive penetration capability. This made it particularly effective from the PPSH-41 submachine gun, where its flat trajectory and penetration could defeat body armor and light cover. The .45 ACP, officially the .45 automatic Colt pistol, stands as the signature American pistol and submachine gun caliber. Adopted in 1905 and refined through 1911, this heavy, relatively slow round deliberately prioritized massive stopping power over penetration or velocity. Firing a substantial 230-grain bullet at just 830 feet per second, it formed the heart of both the Thompson submachine gun and the legendary M1911 pistol that served American forces for over 7 decades. The .380 by 200, officially the .38 S&W, served as the official service revolver cartridge of the British military. Used extensively in the Webley Mark IV revolver, this cartridge fired a relatively heavy 200-grain bullet at modest velocity, offering significant stopping power at close quarters where most pistol combat occurred. It replaced the earlier .455 Webley as the standard British sidearm cartridge. Moving on, the 8x22mm Nambu, the official Japanese pistol cartridge adopted in 1904. It was generally considered significantly underpowered and mechanically unreliable compared to contemporary 9mm or 7.62mm Tokarev rounds used by other major powers. Firing a light 102-grain bullet at approximately 1,000 feet per second, it provided minimal stopping power. The 9x19mm Glicenti represents an Italian variant of the standard 9x19mm Parabellum cartridge. However, it was typically loaded to substantially lower pressures compared to the German military version due to the weaker construction of Italian pistols chambered for it. Used primarily in the Beretta M1915 pistol and certain Italian submachine guns, it offered reduced performance compared to standard 9mm Parabellum caliber. The 7.65 by 21 mm Parabellum, also called 9 mm Parabellum, was actually the original cartridge developed for the famous Luger P08 pistol in 1900, before the later 9 by 19 mm version. While largely replaced by the more powerful 9 mm round, it still saw substantial use early in the war, particularly continuing in Swiss military service, where it remained standard. Next, the 7.65 by 17 mm Browning, also universally known as .32 ACP, or automatic Colt pistol. This common European civilian and police cartridge saw widespread use in smaller, compact sidearms carried by officers and second-line troops across virtually all combatant nations. Firing a 71-grain bullet at approximately 900 feet per second, it provided minimal stopping power but maximum concealability. The 7.65 by 20 mm Longe served as the primary French submachine gun and pistol round, adopted in 1935. Used in weapons like the MAS-38 submachine gun, it offered excellent accuracy and mild recoil, but clearly lacked the raw stopping power and penetration of the larger 9 mm Parabellum caliber used by other nations. The 7.63 by 25 mm Mauser represents an extremely high-velocity pistol cartridge, famous for its use in the distinctive Mauser C96 broom handle pistol, beginning in 1896. Achieving velocities up to 1,400 feet per second with its 86-grain bullet, it strongly influenced and essentially served as the direct basis for the Soviet 7.62 mm Tokarev design. The 4.55 Webley, the powerful large-bore British revolver cartridge, adopted in 1891. Although officially superseded by the smaller 38 by 200 cartridge in 1932, enormous stockpiles of this classic British round remained in service throughout the conflict. Firing a massive 265-grain bullet at approximately 650 feet per second, it delivered tremendous close-range stopping power. The .38 Long Colt, this older American revolver round dating to 1875, was still occasionally found in limited use, particularly among military police or secondary support units, as wartime demands drew upon every available weapon and ammunition stockpile, regardless of obsolescence.
The 9 by 23 mm Largo served as the standard Spanish service cartridge beginning in 1905. Although Spain remained officially neutral during World War II, this caliber saw international use in reliable Spanish Astra pistols that were frequently exported or sold to various combatants and resistance forces throughout the conflict. Next up, the 7.62 by 38 mm R Nagant. This represents a very unusual gas seal revolver round used exclusively by the Russians in the Nagant M1895 revolver. When fired, the cartridge case's unique design allows it to expand forward, completely sealing the normally present gap between the cylinder and barrel. This increased both muzzle velocity and allowed the weapon to be effectively suppressed, a unique capability among revolvers. The 11 mm French Ordonnance, an obsolete black powder revolver cartridge from the 19th century, adopted in 1873. Its usage during World War II was extremely limited, likely restricted to reserve forces or colonial troops in remote areas still armed with ancient sidearms from previous conflicts. Now let's look at carbine and intermediate calibers. The .30 carbine, officially the .30 caliber M1 carbine cartridge, represents a dedicated intermediate round developed specifically for the revolutionary American M1 carbine, adopted in 1941.
Firing a 110-grain bullet at approximately 1,990 feet per second, it offered significantly more range, accuracy, and striking power than any pistol cartridge, yet generated far less recoil than a full-power rifle round, making it ideal for support troops, officers, and paratroopers. The 7.92 by 33 mm Kurtz, discussed earlier, but sometimes referenced separately in experimental contexts, this intermediate cartridge fundamentally revolutionized small arms design and influenced every subsequent assault rifle development globally. The 7.65 by 35 mm Livens represents experimental German intermediate cartridge research. These early trials explored various case lengths and bullet weights during the late 1930s and early 1940s, testing fundamental ballistic concepts that eventually culminated in the successful 7.92 by 33 mm Kurtz cartridge that armed the Sturmgewehr 44. Continuing with heavy machine gun and anti-tank rifle calibers, the .50 BMG, standing for Browning machine gun and officially designated the .50 caliber M2, reigns as the undisputed king of Allied heavy machine gun rounds. Adopted in 1921, it was used extensively in the legendary Browning M2 heavy machine gun. Firing a massive 660 to 800 grain bullet at approximately 2,900 feet per second, it proved utterly devastating against infantry concentrations, light vehicles, and low-flying aircraft across every theater. The 12.7 by 108 mm serves as the Soviet direct counterpart to the American .50 BMG. Adopted in 1934, this heavy machine gun round provided immense stopping power and armor penetration capability from weapons like the DS-HK heavy machine gun. Firing a 745-grain bullet at approximately 2,800 feet per second, it offered comparable performance to the American round. The 12.7 by 81 mm Vickers was actually a British heavy machine gun cartridge adopted in the 1920s and designed specifically for aircraft installations. It was fitted primarily to Vickers machine guns used extensively during the Air War, though it was eventually largely superseded by cannon armament. The 12.7 by 81 mm SR Breda represents the standard Italian heavy machine gun round adopted in 1932. It was notably smaller and generated significantly less power than the American or Soviet equivalents, delivering a 650-grain bullet at approximately 2,500 feet per second. This limited its effectiveness against heavier armor and longer ranges. The 13.2 by 99 mm Hotchkiss was a substantial anti-aircraft round used by the French military and notably by the Japanese Type 93 heavy machine gun. Firing an 830-grain bullet at approximately 2,400 feet per second, it proved highly effective against unarmored targets and light vehicles, though inadequate against serious armor protection. The 13 by 64 mm represents an unusual short and extremely heavy caliber round. This likely saw specialized service in specific aircraft installations or heavy weapons platforms, demanding exceptional impact energy at shorter ranges rather than velocity. The 14.5 by 114 mm stands as an absolutely enormous Soviet anti-tank rifle round, adopted in 1941. Used extensively in both the PTRD-41 and PTRS-41 anti-tank rifles, this massive cartridge fired a 978-grain armor-piercing bullet at approximately 3,300 feet per second. It could penetrate up to 40 millimeters of armor plate at close range, making it effective against early war German tanks and armored vehicles. Next, the 15 by 96 mm, identified with the MG-151 designation. This was actually the standard German 15 mm aircraft cannon round, used in the MG-151/1 cannon installation, particularly in feared fighters like the Bf-109 and FW-190. It fired explosive projectiles, highly effective against enemy aircraft structures. The 15 by 104 mm likely represents an experimental or specialized heavy anti-tank or aircraft cannon round. Such large cartridges were continuously developed and tested throughout the war, seeking advantages in velocity, penetration, or explosive payload for various specialized applications. Let's move on to autocannon and aircraft calibers. The 20 by 82 mm served as one designation for German aircraft cannon ammunition, though the most common German 20 mm aircraft round was actually the 20 by 82 mm used in weapons like the MGFF cannon. These delivered devastating explosive payloads in relatively compact packages, perfect for fighter aircraft installations. The 20 by 139 mm, more commonly associated with the Swiss Solothurn S-18 anti-tank rifle, adopted in the 1930s. This powerful 20 mm cartridge was produced by Switzerland and widely exported, being adopted by Italy and various smaller Axis nations seeking effective light anti-armor capability. It could penetrate approximately 20 mm of armor. The 20 by 110 mm designation typically indicates high-velocity British, American, or other Allied anti-aircraft or anti-tank cannon rounds, designed specifically for maximizing long-range striking power, penetration, and flat trajectory.
The 20 mm Hispano-Suiza stands as the most widely used Allied aircraft cannon caliber of the entire war. The Hispano-Suiza HS-404 20 mm autocannon equipped legendary fighters, including Spitfires, Typhoons, and P-38 Lightnings, delivered truly devastating explosive firepower against German aircraft. Firing at approximately 600 to 700 rounds per minute, it became the Allied standard. The 20 mm Oerlikon, a Swiss design from the 1930s that became famous worldwide for its exceptional effectiveness in the anti-aircraft role, it was adopted extensively for naval point defense against dive bombers and low-flying torpedo aircraft by virtually all Allied navies, firing at approximately 450 rounds per minute. Moving on, the 20 mm Schwach. This standard high-velocity Soviet aircraft cannon round powered the Schwach autocannon used extensively in Yak and Lag fighters throughout the Great Patriotic War. Firing at approximately 800 rounds per minute, it proved critical for Soviet air-to-air combat effectiveness against German aircraft. The 20 mm Type 99 served as the primary Imperial Japanese Navy aircraft cannon round. Adopted in 1939, it was highly distinctive for using thin-walled shells filled with high-capacity explosive fillings, making each hit exceptionally destructive against Allied aircraft structures, despite relatively modest muzzle velocity. The 23 by 152 mm represents a substantially large-caliber Soviet aircraft and anti-aircraft cannon round. Weapons firing this cartridge were designed for heavy strike aircraft and ground-based anti-aircraft roles, offering massive explosive power and extended effective range against both air and ground targets. The 30 by 173 mm Mk108, associated with the German Mk108 designation, this enormous low-velocity but extremely high explosive round was specifically designed as the Schräge Musik, or oblique music installation, upward-firing cannons that allowed German night fighters to attack British heavy bombers from directly below with devastating efficiency, often destroying bombers with just a few hits. Next, the 37 by 198 mm M4, more commonly associated with the American M4 autocannon. However, the primary American 37 mm anti-tank gun actually used the 37 by 223R cartridge. The 37 mm caliber was highly effective during the early war years, but rapidly became obsolete against progressively heavier German tanks like the up-armored Panzer IV and later designs. The 37 by 263 mm B represents a common anti-aircraft round, often associated with early German flak cannons.
The 37mm Flak 36 and similar weapons offered high rates of fire and a good effective ceiling for intercepting bombers, firing explosive projectiles at aerial targets. Now let's look at shotgun calibers. The 12-gauge shotgun ammunition saw extensive use in close-quarters combat, particularly by the United States Marine Corps and Army combat engineers throughout the Pacific Theater. Weapons like the Winchester Model 1997 and Remington Model 31 proved highly effective for brutal jungle fighting, trench clearing, and close-range defensive situations, where their devastating spread pattern was invaluable. Other large calibers. Finally, we have other significant large calibers. The 25mm Hotchkiss served as a French anti-tank gun caliber used extensively during the early stages of the war. Adopted in 1934, this compact but effective round was quickly overwhelmed by the steadily increasing armor protection of German Panzer III and newer designs by 1940, rendering it largely ineffective. The 37mm represents a ubiquitous light cannon caliber used by virtually all combatants during the early war period. It appeared primarily in towed anti-tank guns like the German Pak-36, American M3, and Soviet 61K, and as main armament in light tanks before the armor race demanded substantially bigger guns. The 45mm served as the primary Soviet light anti-tank and tank gun caliber. Adopted in 1932 and based heavily on the German 37mm Pak-36 design, it was reliable and mass-produced in enormous quantities. It served as the Soviet infantry's main defense against German armor during the desperate early war years, equipping both towed anti-tank guns and light tanks like the T-26 and BT series. Next, the 47mm, a common cannon caliber used extensively by both Italy and the United States, is often found in light tank and anti-tank roles. Italy used their excellent 47mm 4732 gun extensively throughout the North African campaigns, while American forces employed 47mm guns in early tank destroyers. The 50mm served as the primary caliber for the German Panzer III medium tank in its earlier versions from 1940 onward. The 50mm KWK-38 and later longer-barreled KWK-39 delivered reasonable armor penetration against early Allied tanks, but were eventually completely outclassed and replaced by 75mm guns as tank armor continued thickening. The 76mm served as the standard Soviet medium tank caliber, most famously fitted to the legendary T-34 medium tank beginning in 1941. The 76.2mm F-34 gun, firing BR-350 armor-piercing ammunition, provided Soviet tankers with a weapon genuinely capable of engaging German medium tanks effectively. This potent high-velocity round also became the developmental basis for the improved American 76mm M1 gun fitted to Upgun's Sherman variants. Up next, the 88mm, unquestionably the most famous and feared German cannon of the entire war. The 8.8cm Flak 18/36/37 series was originally developed as an anti-aircraft gun in the 1930s, but its exceptionally high-velocity performance made it the conflict's premier dual-purpose weapon. Equally feared by Allied airmen and tank crews across every theater, it could destroy any Allied tank at extended ranges. Later variants, like the KWK-36, armed the Tiger I heavy tank. Finally, the 90mm served as the primary heavy cannon of the United States Army during the later war years. Entering service in 1943-1944, it armed the M36 tank destroyer and the M26 Pershing heavy tank.